Welcome back. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Serrett, S-Y, because I love you, R-E-T-T. In 2020, Oxford-based philosopher Toby Ord published a book called The Precipice about the risk of human extinction. He put the chances of existential catastrophe for our species during the next century at 1 in 6. It's quite a specific number and an alarming one. The claim drew headlines at the time and has been influential since, most recently brought up by Australian politician Andrew Leigh in a speech in Melbourne. It's hard to disagree with the idea we face troubling prospects over the coming decades, from climate change, nuclear weapons, and bioengineered pathogens to rogue AI and large asteroids. But what about that number? Where does it come from? And what does it really mean? 1 in 6. Well, you can read the rest of the story in the News section up at coasttocoastam.com. Back to more of my conversation with novelist Chuck Palahniuk and your calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast AM. American novelist Chuck Palahniuk is with us. The Fight Club, of course, Choke, and the brand new one, Not Forever, But For Now. Just reading a kind of a review in Esquire magazine, Chuck. The writer says, Not Forever, But For Now is among his most disturbing novels, as it contains numerous gruesome and repugnant moments, and it features characters who make Tyler Durden look like Harvey the Rabbit. Is that a fair assessment?
Wow, maybe I'm getting good at this. I like to push the envelope all the time. There you go.
Harvey the Rabbit. All right. Let's go to the calls on the wildcard line. Scott is in Costa Mesa, California. Scott, welcome to Coast. You're on the line with Chuck Palahniuk.
Well, thank you very much. A fascinating interview. And really quick, maybe later on, Richard, you could tell us all how your kids' ducks are doing.
Oh, they're growing like crazy. Yeah.
Well, Chuck, it's just an honor to talk to you. And for me, it's like I can't stand the cancel culture society that we've become. And I do have a question on what your thoughts are on of banning books these days. And then on a side note, I would think that writing would be sort of very therapeutic for you with all that your life has endured. And I'm just amazed that, not all caterpillars get the joy of becoming butterflies. And I find that it's amazing that the circumstances that we are all here, it's amazing how the slightest of slivers that we have actually made it to existence. Like if your father passed, you wouldn't be around, and just one of those kind of things where life is pretty amazing. And then any advice on putting pen to paper, because I have a lot of ideas for stories and stuff, but I just don't know where to begin. Thank you.
All right, Scott. Great questions. Great call. Your thoughts on cancel culture, Chuck? Or books and book banning, I guess is.
I was kind of canceled before I was even canceled. I remember years ago submitting manuscripts to publishers and editors and just always getting them kicked back. And they would come so close to being acquired, but ultimately there would be somebody in the marketing department that would say, no, we have no idea what this book is, so we're not going to acquire it. And so finally I decided I was never going to sell a book, so I was going to write a book that people would not buy, but they would never forget. So I sat down and I wrote Fight Club because I thought, they're never going to buy this book. No publisher will put out money on this, but they're going to remember reading this manuscript for the rest of their lives. And that was what really did the trick, because it's not so much about being loved in the first moment. It's about creating a kind of memory or a kind of scar, because people change and the culture changes. And if you can stick around in people's awareness long enough, then the culture and the readership will eventually embrace you. Everything that I love in the culture is typically things that initially came out to very negative reviews. My favorite is Harold and Maude, the movie, with Bud Cort. It came out to terrible, terrible reviews, but now it is an institution. The movie It's a Wonderful Life, the Frank Capra movie, came out to fantastically bad public reception because it came out during the Depression when people did not want a sugary movie. But because it fell out of copyright accidentally and because it stayed around long enough, it was eventually completely embraced by the culture. So long story short, it's not about being liked, it's about being remembered. Because if you're remembered long enough, then eventually, like George Burns, you will be liked. And in regard to writing, the man who taught me the most about writing was a man named Tom Spanbauer. And Tom called it dangerous writing. He said, find a personal thing that appeals to you, whether in a good way or a bad way, and write about that through metaphor. And it's the kind of personal processing that you do that will bring you back to writing on the project over and over, regardless of whether or not you think you'll ever get paid for it. It is that ongoing reward of exhausting your emotional reaction to a situation you cannot resolve and you cannot be with. Tom taught me that. So dangerous writing, that idea of exhausting something very personal through a metaphor on the page, that will always bring you back to working on that project.
Any thoughts on book banning, censorship?
I kind of love it because my books have always been banned. Years ago, I got a letter from the head of the Texas prison system, and she said she loved my books. She had all of my books, but that all of my books were banned throughout the state of Texas in the prisons because they were just too triggering, too salacious. And so I subsequently found out that most of my books are banned in most prisons everywhere and a lot of high schools. But at the same time, it's the books that were banned in my high school, like Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews, that were the most popular books. So I kind of accept that, in a way, banning is a form of marketing, so I'm not completely put off by it.
Great call, Scott. Thank you. Let's go east of the Rockies. Christy is in Cincinnati. Christy, welcome to Coast.
Hi. It's a pleasure to speak with both of you. Mr. Palahniuk, I was just wondering your inspiration for the book Diary. That's one of my favorites.
Boy, Diary. When I was writing Diary, I was really fascinated by how all of these very small Pacific Northwest towns that I grew up around, these really small farm towns like Walla Walla, they were being taken over by this new generation of very wealthy, remote working entrepreneur. So you had these towns that had always had their aristocracy, but then suddenly towns like Billings, Montana, were being taken over by outsiders, and the aristocracy that existed in Butte, Montana, for example, or Spokane, Washington, didn't really have a way of pushing back against these outsiders who were coming in and taking over. So I wanted to experiment with the idea of a small town, in this case, an island off the coast, that had a way of not just surviving the outsiders, but kind of harvesting and exploiting them and destroying them, and in doing so, renewing itself, every 50 years or so. So that was the basis for Diary.
Christy, thanks for the call. In another interview, you talked about how when you're planning a book, you plan up until like the second act. And then after that, you want it to be as much a surprise to you as it is to the reader. Like if you're not surprised, the reader's not going to be surprised. But how do you surprise yourself? You're the one writing the book.
Well, most of us have some rough idea how our life is going to go up to a certain point. But it comes to that kind of mechanical point where we've done as much as we know how to do. And at that point, we just have to kind of trust the trajectory that we have created. And so in a way, it is about creating this mechanical trajectory and trusting that beyond the second act, it is going to complete itself in a way that you could never consciously predetermine, and trusting that it will complete itself in a way that is better than anything you ever could have imagined. And that has never failed me. I had no idea that the narrator and Tyler Durden were the same person in Fight Club until the moment in the book where the reader realizes that. And so it is always about bringing myself to that impasse, but then trusting the entire process will complete the book for me. And I love that part. That last part, that third part, is so glorious.
Was there ever a point, well, like after this breakthrough novel, Fight Club, and this character, Tyler Durden, just becomes so iconic, this anti-hero, that you were worried that might define you for the rest of your career, and that like you didn't want, Leonard Nimoy for a while after Spock, it defined him, and so he wrote this book, I Am Not Spock. Did you try to run away from Tyler Durden for a while and then maybe come back and just sort of resign yourself? Yeah, that's part of my a body of my work. He's one of my children.
And I never think of characters as children, because in a way they are such composites of the people I really love. And that's another, for the first gentleman who called, that's another thing that will bring you back to writing, is if you can write what I call apostolic fiction, where a character is talking about another character that they really love and admire, regardless of the faults of the other character. Very much in this new book, Not Forever But For Now, is very much apostolic fiction, and in that it is a younger brother writing about his older brother in a very worshipful way. And when you have a character articulating their love and their admiration for another character, that is fantastically easy writing to do, because it forces you to figure out why you love things and to write about communicating that love. And that love is the greatest joy in writing, is that we are so seldomly allowed to kind of articulate our love in the culture. We always buy a card, we buy chocolates, we buy a sort of a mediating device. But when we develop a skill for expressing our admiration and love, there is no greater joy, and that will bring you back to working on that project forever.
All right, let's go back to the phones. Max is in Portland, Oregon. Max, welcome to Coast.
This is unbelievable. My favorite author on my favorite radio program, and I get to talk to both of you guys. Chuck, my name's Max. I'm actually in Portland, Oregon. Shout out to the Sultan Cafe on Northwest 18th and Quimby. I understand that you actually spent some time in Northwest Portland, or the Pearl, as they call it now. The owner of that particular cafe told me that you wrote a book there in like a concrete bunker. I, of course, like many callers, are sort of an aspiring writing author myself, novelist. And so my question is, what was your process like in terms of just getting the setting right to write a novel? What was that like? What's the good juju? What's the process like?
Okay, Northwest Portland, you want to talk Northwest Portland? There is a one-block-long street called Trinity Place between Burnside and I think Everett. I lived on Trinity Place for years. It is the spookiest, weirdest little street in Portland. I recommend it, right behind the McDonald's. So, boy, in a way, setting is the least important thing in the novel itself for me. And that's why so many of my scenes are set in airplanes or bathrooms, because you don't have to lapse into a lot of passive description. People know more or less what the setting is going to look like. You can go right into action. But in terms of writing, location for writing, I typically write in really stressful public places like waiting rooms in emergency room waiting rooms. I get kidney stones like crazy. I am what they call a stone thrower. I just get kidney stone after kidney stone. And so I spend a lot of time writing in hospital emergency rooms. Good Samaritan. I've written a lot of Good Samaritan with kidney stones. But also airports. Airports are the other great place to write because they're so stressful and there's so many people around. So if you need a bit of physical business, a gesture, or you need to describe someone's hair or the cut of their clothing, you just need to look up. and find the right person, find the person doing exactly what you wanted to depict, and you can just harvest it in that moment. So locations are right, hospitals, airports, a lot of times gyms, because physical activity will really spur me to thinking in clear new ways. So gymnasiums. Go to Foster Fitness out on Foster and 57th in Portland and say hi to Noel for me. That is a great place to write.
All right, Max. Great call. Let's see. Do we have time for another one? I think I can squeeze. First-time caller Gabriel is in Montebello, California. Gabriel, welcome to Coast. You're on the line with Chuck Palahniuk.
Hey there, Chuck. It's an honor to talk to you. My question was, I'm a big fan of Fight Club. My question is, what did you know that the passing of Meatloaf, and who was Meatloaf based on a character based on Bob?
Yeah, I was really bummed when Meatloaf passed, and there's a kind of sad parallel to that, in that the actor who played almost the Meatloaf equivalent in the movie Choke, that was based on my novel Choke, it was an actor named Brad Michael Henke, who was a former professional football player. He was also a really big guy, very good-natured, very much like Meatloaf, and Brad Michael Henke died recently too. So in a way, both those actors, died fairly, same sort of time frame. And Meatloaf's character, Big Bob, was kind of based on every good-natured guy I knew in the 80s who was doing steroids. And somehow they thought that steroids were going to sort of keep them afloat, keep them young for the rest of their lives. And in a way, when I think about imperialism and imperialist countries, I always think of that as the steroids of a nation, is that you have all this extra outside help, but it's not going to last forever. And
Chuck, pardon the interruption. I'm sorry, Chuck. I got to head into the bottom of the break. I apologize for the interruption. We'll come back, take some more calls, and continue our conversation. Chuck Palahniuk. Researchers were able to deflect lightning using a powerful laser shot into the sky. This is a scientific first. A powerful laser was able to deflect a lightning bolt almost 200 feet before it hit a lightning rod, greatly improving the rod's function. The findings published in January show that lasers could one day be used as protection against dangerous thunderstorms, which kill an average of 43 people in the U.S. every year and cost U.S. homeowners almost $1 billion in insurance claims in 2022. And you can read more of this story about how scientists have bent lightning. That's in the news section up at coasttocoastam.com. Back to more of my conversation with novelist Chuck Palahniuk and your calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Chuck Palahniuk stays with us, the author of Fight Club and the brand new one, Not Forever, But For Now. Before the break, Chuck, I kind of cut you off midstream there. You were talking about a character, or a caller had asked you about the character Bob, played by Meatloaf in Fight Club, who's someone, who's abused steroids. And you were talking or making the analogy between this character and, I guess, the use of steroids and what gunboat diplomacy, kind of, is that the idea?
Well, just to kind of wrap it up, the idea that the narrator in Fight Club thinks that owning a certain amount of things, having a sofa, having an apartment, having a car, will make him an adult. But there was also another group of my friends who felt that getting swole, getting buff, was going to make them an adult. They really had no sort of roadmap for how to become a man in the world. So if they could just get bigger and bigger and bigger, then that's the only route to adulthood that they had. And so Big Bob was really based on all those friends of mine who were doing huge amounts of steroids.
All right. Let's say hello to Amanda is in Charlottesville, Virginia. Amanda, welcome to Coast.
Hi, Chuck. And hi, Richard.
Hi.
I've talked to a couple of writers over the years, and my question is more as you as a reader rather than a writer. And my first question is, when you're writing, do you stop reading because you're afraid of their voice infiltrating yours? And then my second question is, are there any books that you've read that you would love to be able to experience for the first time again? I'm a librarian, so it's kind of why I'm asking these questions.
Great questions, Amanda. Thank you.
So, yeah, that when I'm writing, I'm really trying to stay in the same voice. And so I typically don't read fiction while I'm writing. I'll read a lot of nonfiction, but I just will not read fiction. Because one of the things I really love about fiction is the voiciness. A really good voice, once I get that in my head, I don't want to mess with it. And the second part of the question was, what would I like to read again for the first time?
Yes.
Boy, I wish I could read Slaughterhouse-Five again for the first time. That book was required reading in my high school, and we were the first and the last class that could read it. It was banned instantly. But it was such a revelation in terms of repetition, and a book that was a little more like a song than it was like prose. Because during those years of my life, every song on AM radio was a ballad. The record, the Edmund Fitzgerald, The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, every song you heard, American Pie, you were dancing to story after story after story. And so for me, prose fiction has to read very much like a song. And especially when I'm reading a story out loud to people, it has to be more like I'm singing the story. And so Slaughterhouse-Five gave me very much that effect. I loved reading it. It was so much like a song.
Thanks for the call, Amanda. You describe yourself as, the genre as transgressional fiction. What is transgressional fiction?
Well, that's kind of a label that got put on my fiction by the market at the time. And it kind of referred to books like Trainspotting or American Psycho or the Monkey Wrench Gang, where people acted out in these very antisocial ways in order to kind of prove that they were alive. And in a way, I always see my own work as mostly kind of a reinvented romance. They're all romance novels because the characters more or less always end up bonding with one other person.
Interesting. So you're a romance novelist.
Well, please.
Let me ask you, because the characters have, so many layers. Are you ever frustrated that maybe people who read the books kind of overlook maybe the complexity of the characters, their emotions and their layers, because they're sort of, captivated by the salaciousness or the violence and so forth? They don't appreciate the layers and the emotional complexity of the characters?
That is always the case. That is always the case. And so in a way, you want it to be complicated enough that people will have to read it several times. The first time for the kind of aesthetic experience, but then subsequently to kind of figure out how it's structured and all the parts that might have been missed. Because I've got copies of magazines around that I have looked at hundreds of times, but they're always falling open. I'm always finding a page I've never seen before. And so it's that kind of longevity that brings me back to work. And that's why I don't worry about losing people, because eventually it's that sense that they haven't fully understood the thing that brings them into communication with other people. There was a sociologist named Shirley Bryce Heath, and she says a book becomes a classic only when people have to form a community in order to fully understand it. And she cites the Lord of the Rings books because it does create this community of people. And so I always hope that my books will create that same community.
Let's say hello to Jose is in Silver Springs, Maryland. Jose, good morning. Welcome to Coast.
Hello, and good morning. My question was more like, would the movie Fight Club kind of like the character kind of he contradicts himself. And the reason, I mean, there's like a scene where, of course, he's in a restaurant and he's, of course, speaking to the narrator. And, of course, you see him, I mean, the aesthetics there, I mean, you could see he's kind of like, I think he's bashing corporations and stuff, but at the same time, he's sitting there with, like, which looks like an expensive leather jacket and, like, well-kept hair. So it's just, it was more like, I just look at it like the character, of course, of Tyler Durden, the Brad Pitt character, that it just looks like it's like he's very confident, and which makes him very confident. And it was just in like a view I had that here he's
like he's being hypocritical because he's railing against consumerism, and yet he's wearing the fine threads and so forth. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. He's wearing. Yeah. That's pretty much what I just wanted. That was my. I wanted.
All right.
To know
What are your thoughts on that, Chuck?
I love the perversity of that. I fully agree, and it is the fact that you can make a capitalist system attack itself if it thinks it's going to make money. And nobody at 20th Century Fox wanted to make Fight Club, but they knew that Brad Pitt was attached and David Fincher was attached, and that they'd gotten Edward Norton attached. And it was such a great package that despite the fact that the people at Fox really disliked the book and they did not want to make this project, they knew that it was going to go somewhere and someone was going to make it. So Fox kind of held its nose and made this because they were more afraid of somebody else making money. And I think that ultimately it is that kind of greed that you can use against itself to get out a message that is not in the best interest of the system that is kind of our salvation. I say use it. It's just fantastically perverse.
Great call, Jose. Thank you. Some of the other themes in Fight Club that you've talked about is the secondary father figure, like the apprenticeship. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
I never understood why street gangs worked the way they did. They seemed to be completely senseless until I saw a Joseph Campbell interview with Bill Moyer. And Joseph Campbell said that in people's lives, men and women, there is the primary father who loves the child unconditionally. But then there has to be a secondary father who loves the child but forces the child to confront challenges. And so the secondary father typically was a sports coach or a clergyman or a teacher or an employer, a boss. And the boss doesn't have to love you. The boss just has to tell you to do things that you think are beyond your abilities. And so the boss coaches you to discover what you're really, really capable of. And there's more of a body of literature about the secondary mother as well. When you see a movie like The Devil Wears Prada, it's very much the secondary mother who doesn't love the antagonist, doesn't love the protagonist, but she provides challenges that allow the protagonist to grow as a character, as a person. So whether it's the secondary mother or the secondary father, their job isn't to love you. Their job is to challenge you. And so after I heard Joseph Campbell explain that, street gangs suddenly made total sense to me. They are very much the secondary father.
Interesting. Another theme that you talk about with Fight Club is consensual rough play. Can you unpack that for us?
That is something that didn't make sense to me until I heard Jordan Peterson talking about it. This idea that the father provides this kind of rough play that establishes I don't want to say limitations, but establishes sort of extremes of behavior that are going to be allowable. That the father allows roughhousing, this kind of rough play, but also punishes it when it passes a certain level of violence. And I remember that kind of rough play with my father throwing us kids around. There were four of us, and all of us piling on him and trying to sort of wrestle him down. but it was very much that kind of rough play that Jordan Peterson writes about. And seeing it labeled as such made it very, very clear in my mind, and that's what I wanted Fight Club to be, this kind of structured, consensual, rough play.
Let's see. I think we have time for one more call here. Anthony is in Shreveport, Louisiana. Anthony, welcome to Coast.
Hi. Thank you for having time for me. Pleasure speaking with you, Mr. Palahniuk, or Chuck. I don't know what you go by. So super quick backstory. I graduated high school in 1999, so might be the stereotypical neurotic Caucasian male who Fight Club related to, at the time in my life when I saw it, right? Now, I don't know if you believe in spiritual coincidence or how you feel about that, but I just got out of a Zoom AA meeting. I'm in addiction recovery. And I remember the themes in Fight Club with the 12-step program meetings that I had no idea how much that would apply to my adult life. So I really appreciated that in the movie. Unfortunately, I'm a terrible reader. I apologize about that. I'm the type who reads a book, or when I'm reading, I stop, I look up words, I get distracted, I make lists, and I give up. I've read a little bit of nonfiction in the realm of self-help, but I'm bad at fiction. So my question is, if you could recommend one of your books for me to read, what would it be and why? And then if you have time, what's your opinion of the proliferation of mixed martial arts fighting entertainment, and do you think Fight Club influenced that? Thank you.
Wow, great questions, Anthony.
So, Anthony, I'm not going to recommend one of my books. I'm going to recommend two books by other writers. And they're both short story collections, and they will serve you so well. I was the last kid in my elementary grade to learn how to read. I don't think I really got reading until fourth grade. And short stories served me incredible. So there is a Korean-American writer named Naomi Moon. Her first name is spelled N-A-M-I, last name M-U-N, Naomi Moon. She has a collection called Miles from Nowhere, and it is fantastic. Especially if you're in 12-step, you will love this collection. You'll be laughing and crying in the same moment. And also a short story collection called Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson. And Dennis is spelled with only one N. Dennis Johnson, Jesus' Son. It's also very much in the same vein. It's not preachy 12-step stuff, but it is very redemptive. Short stories, they're both short story collections. Jesus' Son and Miles from Nowhere. You will love them both. You'll be able to finish each story before you become distracted, and you will love absolutely every story in both books.
All right, Anthony, I hope you enjoy that. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the rest of the questions there regarding Fight Club's influence on mixed martial arts. Just enough time to say thank you, Chuck, and it's been a blast. Great to meet you, speak with you. And congratulations on the new book. Amazon and wherever good books are sold, I'm guessing.
Of course. Thank you very much.
Not forever, but for now. Chuck Palahniuk. Thank you again, Chuck. All right. When we come back, psychic remote viewer Angela Thomas and her remarkable encounters with the paranormal.